We got Anthony from Melbourne who says, hopefully you guys aren't too over talking about this. Tony has been given a lot of criticism for allowing Punk to berate EVPs, etc. in the post-media scrum. Granted, it should never have been able to get to this point, but do you think if Tony tried to silence Punk, it could have led to an argument between the two on camera? My guess is that's why he didn't interrupt and was going to talk to Punk after the event. I also recall hearing Tony was going to stop doing post-media scrums some time ago, but ended up keeping them. Is it possible this entire incident may be avoided by not having Punk do an interview right after the match? Not only would his adrenaline have been high, but he would have known he suffered another significant injury. In addition, is there any chance the EVPs would have left if they didn't have? Okay, so we're playing. Yeah, there's been something said about, like, if Punk didn't do the interview right afterwards, maybe somehow this would have been avoided. Maybe he would have calmed down. Maybe things would be different. I mean,
I don't think that would have been the case.
Maybe if the muffins weren't there, maybe I don't know. Maybe if Nick Hausman didn't attend that day. Maybe
if the pay-per-view was on a Saturday instead of a Sunday.
Sure, exactly. We're just playing so many what ifs, and none of these things I don't think anybody could have foreseen. There's no way Tony Khan would have been able to have the foresight to say, if I didn't let Punk do this right now, he wouldn't have said any of that.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
To the first point, and I think Tony Khan did get a lot of criticism for just sitting there. But to that point, if he stops Punk and they have and Punk is just going, and suddenly he's getting into an argument with Tony Khan, that's a way bigger story in the moment. And if you're Tony Khan, I do sympathize being in that situation. What do you do here? You're almost putting on this face of just, not creating
drama,
a shouting match with your top talent in front of cameras and media at the same time. So he was in a very unenviable position there of what you do in the moment. He was going to be criticized regardless.
Agreed. Yeah, I think in the days past, I feel like the audience is able to, I hope, start to see that. The fact that, his not reacting to the moment is not really any sort of major indictment of, his feelings on this situation. At least I hope I feel like that's the case. However, I feel like there's still enough, criticism you can give him for even allowing a wrestler to feel that sort of freedom to be able to use that company air time to air out his own agenda. Realistically, would that have happened if Vince McMahon was, holding a press conference? If Hunter and Triple H and WWE was holding a press conference, would a wrestler have felt like enough confidence and just, I don't know, I guess
it's hard to say because, they don't do them. I would say, at certain points in history of certain figures, could I have imagined a Shawn Michaels in 97 doing that next to Vince McMahon? 100% I could imagine him doing that. I would imagine today's roster, it would probably be unlikely, but you can't say impossible. But you're right. In terms of that being an overall issue, CM Punk felt that he had the comfort that he could do that with Tony Khan right next to him. And that does tell you something about, the fact that he felt he could just berate these EVPs so openly right next to his boss, to the media on top of it. It does tell you of the feeling of invincibility that he had in that press conference. Not even, and you could see as Tony Khan tried to interject at times, and Punk did not want to criticize Tony Khan when he said, I should have said no comment. He said, you shouldn't have to say that. He was definitely trying to shield Tony Khan, but inadvertently, he was hitting Tony Khan with the same bullets that he was sending to the EVPs, who are ultimately hires by Tony Khan. So, it was, I think if this was calculated, I think you could look at it as a miscalculation by CM Punk, because it really puts Tony Khan in an unenviable position where you have to take some kind of action, and that's all before the fight takes place. Just in that moment with the press conference, had there been no physicality, that becomes an interesting question of what action, if any, is taken after that, given it is your top star, who's also injured. So there's that factor too that kind of is thrown into that whole equation.
We got a Vince from Sacramento who says, do you guys feel if Punk is fired from AEW that his legacy is forever ruined? I feel the all-time great moment of his return on Rampage last summer would be tarnished, and him getting fired would also validate WWE's reasons for their side of the story as to why there was a falling out between Punk and WWE back in 2014.
I don't. And I don't think that it's fair either to look at this situation and conflate it with his reasons for leaving WWE, that this somehow justifies one side or the other. They are totally separate situations, and he can be correct in certain critiques and wrong in others. So I would not conflate the two. And over time, I do not think this would certainly not be a high point in terms of his public perception. I think it would be right now is the lowest that Punk's perception has been in quite some time. But with time, I think that there would be kind of an absence from this controversy, that there would be, more so looking at an overall career of Punk. But when you're writing the story of CM Punk, like his personality and his handling of conflicts in a very public manner, that's a very big part of who Phil Brooks CM Punk is. Like that's definitely part of his story of where he is left in conflict potentially here. But it also becomes the question if this is the last chapter of CM Punk's wrestling career, and that's a question mark.
Yeah. I also don't think it tarnishes his career. Like, in, I don't know, 20 years time when we see the documentary about the career of CM Punk, I feel like this is just, another very colorful chapter of the man's life. He really came in, he exited his last, place of work in a blaze of glory, and seemed to arrive here and exit, in a year's time with as much of that fire. So, I think it just, if anything, kind of builds the legend of like what a unique personality he is. And I don't think it takes at all away from the connection that he's built with his audience. That solid crowd based off of, one mention for the United Center, or the pipe bomb. Like, these are all things that are still, I think, very valid. It's like, Brett, like maybe the screw job like is unfortunately the thing that is most well remembered with Brett's career. But I think for those of you that are fans, most of us, when we think of Brett, we certainly don't think of the screw job first and foremost. We don't think of the controversy. We think of his contributions to the business. So I would say no.
Generally, big stars are, it's you mitigate the negative and you prop up the positive. Like, Shawn Michaels is not going to be defined by, the 90s in terms of his conduct. He, and to his credit, like, he seems like a significantly matured individual in the decades that have followed. But also had that second act to his career on top of it. But it was, there was a time he was a nightmare for people to work with. And ultimately, like, that is not going to color people's perception of him generally, unless those were personally, on the receiving end.
I feel like I would argue that maybe this whole episode has maybe like tempered people's just like undying sort of like, like love of Phil Brooks, perhaps. I feel like there very much was like, the idea that this man could do no wrong. Everything he said, at least in his side of the argument of why he left WWE, must be true.
He has his backers here too. Like, there are those that support him in this case. It's just, the targets in this one, it gets very easy when the target is WWE, and you are going to, I think generally most audiences are going to sympathize with the worker in that equation against the big company. But this one, like, the targets are more sympathetic figures to the average wrestling fan.
It's Cole Cabana. Yeah, absolutely. So I think if anything, it probably gives us a more realistic impression of who this person is. But I also don't think you can deny, even after this, how big of a star and how big of a legend he will become. He already is in some cases. Okay, let's go up next to Jamie, who says, hello.